AITA for refusing to host family dinners because no one ever brings anything. I decided to teach them a lesson. I have always been the one to bring my family together. Ever since I got my own place, I took on the responsibility of hosting monthly family dinners. At first, I loved it. I really did. There was something so satisfying about preparing a big meal, setting a nice table, and seeing everyone come together to eat, laugh, and share stories. It made me feel like I was creating something special, a tradition that would keep us connected. But over time, I started to realize that I was the only one actually putting in any effort. At first, I didn't mind cooking everything. I enjoy cooking, and it felt good to provide for my family. But what started as a labor of love slowly turned into something else entirely. No one ever offered to bring anything. Not a side dish, not a bottle of wine, not even a bag of ice. It wasn't just that they never offered, it was that they fully expected me to handle everything without question. And if I ever did ask for help, the excuses rolled in like clockwork. I'm too busy, or I don't cook, or I wouldn't even know what to bring. It started to feel less like a family gathering and more like I was running a free restaurant. The breaking point for me came last month. I had spent the whole day cooking, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, homemade bread, and a salad. I even baked a pie for dessert because I knew my dad had a sweet tooth. My brother, who lives 20 minutes away and has zero responsibilities outside of work, was the only person I asked to bring something. Just some bread. That's it. I figured it was the easiest possible thing to ask for, no cooking involved, just pick up a loaf from the store. He walked in empty-handed. When I asked about the bread, he just shrugged and said, "Oh, I forgot." You got it, right? And then he put a six-pack of beer in my fridge, the beer he had brought for himself, of course. I just stared at him. It was like a slap in the face. He had no problem remembering something for himself, but when it came to contributing even the smallest thing to a dinner he was happy to eat, it didn't even cross his mind. I wish I could say that was the only issue that night, but it wasn't. My cousin, who always finds something to complain about, took one look at the spread and said, "Oh, you didn't make lasagna. You know that's my favorite." No thank you, no appreciation for the hours I had spent cooking, just disappointment that I hadn't tailored the meal specifically to him. My aunt made a comment about how I could have added a few more side dishes, as if 5 wasn't enough. And at the end of the night, everyone just got up and left, leaving me with a mountain of dirty dishes and not a single offer to help. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and frustrated, and decided I was done. I wasn't going to do this anymore. If my family wanted to have these dinners, they needed to contribute. The next day, I sent a message in our family group chat. I told them I wasn't hosting another dinner unless we did it potluck style. Everyone would be responsible for bringing a dish or at least contributing in some way. I didn't think it was an unreasonable request. But the backlash I got was immediate. My mom called me first, acting like I had just announced I was cutting ties with the family. "But you love hosting," she said, like that somehow meant I was obligated to keep doing it under these conditions. My brother, the same one who couldn't even bring a loaf of bread, said, "That's so dramatic. It's just easier if one person handles it." Easy for him to say when he was literally doing nothing. My cousin, the one who whined about lasagna, said I was ruining our tradition. That's when it hit me. They didn't appreciate what I was doing. They had just gotten used to it. They saw it as a service, not an act of love. I stuck to my decision. When the next month rolled around, no one stepped up to host. They all just assumed I would cave and do it anyway. When I didn't, my mom called again and said, "So are we just not doing family dinners anymore?" I told her, "Not unless people are willing to contribute." That was 2 months ago. No one has offered to host. No one has suggested an alternative. The family dinners just stopped. And the fact that they would rather let the tradition disappear than take even a little responsibility for it tells me everything I need to know. So, am I the asshole for refusing to keep being taken advantage of? Because from where I'm standing, I think I finally just set a boundary. Update 1. After 2 months of radio silence, I figured that was it for family dinners. No one had stepped up, no one had even brought it up, and life just moved on. It was honestly a little strange at first. Those monthly dinners had been such a constant that their absence felt like something was missing. But as the weeks passed, I started to enjoy the freedom. No more stressing over menus, no more rushing around the kitchen, no more last-minute grocery store runs because I'd forgotten an ingredient in my quest to make everyone's favorite dish. It was peaceful. And if my family noticed or cared that we weren't gathering anymore, they certainly weren't telling me. Then, out of nowhere, my dad called. That alone was enough to make me pause. He's never been the one to initiate plans. If he wants to see me, it's usually my mom coordinating it, or I'm the one reaching out. So when he asked if I wanted to grab lunch, I knew something was up. I agreed, but I braced myself. If he was calling, it meant the family had finally started getting antsy about the lack of dinners, and I was about to hear all about it. We met at this little burger place we used to go to when I was a kid, and for the first half of lunch, everything seemed normal. We talked about work, about a movie he'd just watched, about the neighbor who still hadn't mowed his lawn even though it was practically a jungle. And then, just as I was starting to wonder if I had misread the situation entirely, he casually mentioned that my mom was upset, my brother had been complaining, and my aunt kept bringing up how someone should do something. But, of course, no one actually wanted to do anything. I just nodded, waiting for the inevitable guilt trip. This was usually the part where someone in the family tried to convince me that I was being selfish or that it was my role to host. But instead, my dad surprised me. He wiped some ketchup off his fingers, sighed, and said he told them they were being lazy. That if they wanted family dinners back, they should stop acting like kids and figure it out themselves. I blinked. Of all people, my dad was the last one I expected to take my side. He's usually the kind of guy who stays out of drama, lets my mom handle the social stuff, and just goes along with whatever keeps the peace. But here he was, laying it out plainly, they had taken me for granted, and it wasn't my job to fix that. The next morning, I woke up to absolute chaos in the group chat. It started with my brother, who, shockingly, had finally offered to host. Except his version of hosting was announcing that he would order takeout, and everyone could just Venmo him their share. He even attached a screenshot of a takeout menu, like that was supposed to settle things. Immediately, my cousin lost it. He went on a rant about how it wasn't the same, how family dinners were about home-cooked meals, and how this was missing the entire point. Which was ironic, considering he had never lifted a finger to contribute before. My mom tried to calm things down by suggesting they just go to a restaurant instead, but that was shut down in record time because no one wanted to split the bill evenly. Classic. Then my aunt jumped in, complaining about how expensive takeout would be, which somehow spiraled into a full-blown argument about who ate more food at family gatherings. My brother, who had clearly been backed into a corner, doubled down, saying no one else had volunteered, so if they didn't like his plan, they could figure it out themselves. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. For the first time, they weren't blaming me. They weren't mad at me for refusing to host. They were mad at each other for not being able to agree on how to make it work. I just watched as the messages kept coming in, the group chat slowly imploding over something they had all taken for granted when it was my responsibility. No one apologized outright, but I didn't need them to. The shift in tone said it all. They had finally realized how much effort I had been putting in, how much work went into those dinners, and now that the responsibility was on them, they were floundering. That felt like a win. Update 2. Just when I thought the family had given up, an unexpected notification popped up in the group chat, an invitation to a family dinner. At my aunt's house. I stared at the message for a long moment, half convinced I was seeing things. My aunt, the same woman who once claimed she was too busy to bring a store-bought salad, had volunteered to host. It had to be a trap. Or at the very least, a half-hearted attempt to prove some kind of point. I could almost hear her voice saying something smug, some little remark about how, it's not that hard, or, you just have to be organized, like she hadn't spent years enjoying my effort without lifting a finger. But curiosity got the better of me, and I RSVP'd yes. If nothing else, it would be interesting to see how this played out. The night of the dinner, I showed up right on time, fully expecting to walk into a room full of takeout containers or a pot of barely seasoned spaghetti. Maybe some store-bought sides thrown onto a plate with all the enthusiasm of someone doing court-ordered community service. But what I walked into was chaos. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel the tension in the air. It was the kind of charged atmosphere that comes when things are already going wrong, but no one wants to admit it yet. My aunt was in the kitchen, red-faced and flustered, stirring a pot of pasta with way more aggression than necessary, like the noodles had personally wronged her. The entire house smelled like something was burning, and when I glanced over at the counter, I saw why. A tray of what were supposed to be roasted vegetables sat there, charred beyond recognition, the kind of blackened mess that would set off a smoke alarm if given just a few more minutes in the oven. My cousin, who had apparently taken it upon himself to bake bread from scratch, why, I have no idea, was hovering over the oven with a look of sheer panic. Every few seconds, he would crack the oven door open just a sliver, as if checking on the bread like this would somehow reverse whatever mistake he had already made. His hands were covered in flour, and based on the visible clumps of dough stuck to his shirt, it was safe to assume things hadn't gone according to plan. He muttered something under his breath, jaw clenched, and I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. He had always been one of the loudest complainers when I hosted, whining about dishes not being to his exact taste, and now here he was, battling what I could only assume was a gluten-based nightmare of his own making. My mom was at the dining table, trying to set it while simultaneously picking apart a sauce that looked more like thick tomato paste than anything remotely edible. She held the spoon hesitantly, staring at the contents of the pot like it might suddenly fix itself if she concentrated hard enough. The spoon clinked against the side, and she let out a sigh, her frustration just barely contained. It was clear she had already given up, but she wasn't saying anything yet. And my brother? He waltzed in 20 minutes late, empty-handed, and immediately grabbed a beer from the fridge without so much as a second glance at the disaster unfolding around him. He didn't even look at the table, didn't check to see if anyone needed help, just popped open the bottle, took a long sip, and leaned against the counter like he was an invited guest at a restaurant rather than a supposed participant in this meal. The funniest part? They all kept sneaking glances at me. Not outright asking for help, but lingering looks, little pauses, like they were waiting for me to step in. Like they expected me to roll up my sleeves, sigh in resignation, and take over the way I always used to. I could feel the unspoken expectation hovering in the air, like at any moment, I would take pity on them, grab a wooden spoon, and somehow save this meal from the brink of disaster. But I didn't. I just smiled, took a seat, and watched the show. The dinner itself was an experience. The pasta, clumped together in thick, overcooked masses, was somehow both mushy and dry at the same time. It was the kind of texture that made chewing a chore, like each bite was a personal challenge. The sauce, which had started as an ambitious attempt at something homemade, was thick, pasty, and aggressively acidic. It clung to the noodles in uneven globs, some bites drowning in it while others were completely bare. The bread my cousin had attempted to bake. A complete disaster. It looked solid enough, but the moment he attempted to cut into it, the knife barely made a dent. He struggled with it for a solid minute before finally managing to saw off a piece, only to realize that the inside was somehow both too dense and still slightly raw. He took one bite, chewed for way too long, and then dramatically pushed his plate away, like he had just lost a part of his soul. The salad, the one dish that required absolutely no skill, was literally just a bowl of plain lettuce with a bottle of dressing placed next to it like an afterthought. No toppings, no seasoning, just dry leaves sitting in a bowl, waiting for someone to make the effort of actually assembling a proper salad themselves. My aunt, clearly exhausted, kept making frustrated little noises under her breath every time someone asked where something was. My mom, unusually quiet, focused way too hard on her plate, chewing with an intensity that suggested she was trying to avoid speaking at all. My cousin looked like he was experiencing an existential crisis, staring down at his failed bread with the haunted expression of a man who had underestimated every step of the process. And my brother, oblivious as ever, just kept eating like nothing was wrong, happily shoveling food into his mouth as if he wasn't sitting in the middle of what could only be described as an unintentional comedy sketch. The stress was palpable. Every few minutes, someone sighed or muttered about how much effort this had taken. My aunt, usually the loudest voice at these gatherings, barely spoke as she picked at her food, the exhaustion evident in every movement. My cousin, still recovering from his baking failure, looked genuinely rattled, like he had just learned some fundamental truth about the world that he wasn't ready to accept. And then, finally, my mom exhaled deeply, put her fork down, and said, "I don't know how you did this every month." That was the moment it clicked for them. For years, they had walked into my house, sat down, and eaten without a second thought. They had never considered how much time, energy, and planning went into making those meals happen. They never worried about grocery shopping, timing the dishes, setting the table, or making sure everyone's favorites were included. They had just shown up, eaten, and left, assuming it all just happened. But now, as they sat around that table, stomachs full but not exactly satisfied, surrounded by the wreckage of their own making, they finally understood. My aunt, rubbing her temples like she had just fought in a war, muttered, "Potluck sounds good next time." And just like that, the dynamic shifted. Update 3. Things had been going well for a few months. Ever since the infamous disaster at my aunt's house, the family had finally started to understand what I had been dealing with for years. The potluck system was working, everyone was contributing, no one was overwhelmed, and for the first time in a long time, I actually enjoyed family dinners again. No more frantic meal prep, no more feeling like a short-order cook in my own home, no more last-minute grocery runs because someone forgot to bring what they promised. It was nice. Peaceful. Balanced. Even my brother, who had spent years showing up empty-handed and oblivious, was participating. Not perfectly, of course, he was still the king of bringing the absolute bare minimum, like a single bottle of soda or a bag of chips he had clearly picked up at a gas station on the way over, but it was effort. And effort, in my family, was a monumental achievement. For the first time in forever, I felt like I wasn't being taken for granted. Then my brother pulled the ultimate betrayal. It started with a casual mention over lunch, the way someone might mention a new movie they wanted to see. He was hosting a Friendsgiving at his place. At first, I laughed, thinking he had to be joking. This was a man who had once forgotten to bring a loaf of bread to a dinner that he was actively attending. A man who had never in his life hosted anything more complicated than a beer and pizza night. A man who, just a few months prior, had genuinely suggested ordering takeout for a family gathering because it's just easier. But no. He wasn't joking. Not only was he hosting, but he had planned the entire thing down to the smallest detail. He had sent out a menu, assigned dishes to his friends, and even decorated his apartment. He had gone to multiple stores to get the perfect table settings, bought festive little centerpieces, and was even, according to his own words, brining a turkey for maximum flavor. I stared at the text in disbelief. For years, he had acted like contributing to family dinners was an unbearable burden. Every time I had asked for the smallest bit of help, it had been met with excuses, eye rolls, or a half-hearted "I forgot." But now, with his friends, he was suddenly the host of the year. Coordinating dishes, decorating, planning a full Thanksgiving meal. The same person who once said cooking was too much work was now roasting a turkey and sending out detailed instructions for side dishes. I confronted him about it, fully expecting some flimsy excuse. Maybe something about how it was a one-time thing, or how his friends were helping more than family ever did. But no. He just shrugged and said, "It's different when it's for friends." That stung. It wasn't even that I wanted him to throw himself into family dinners with the same enthusiasm he had for Friendsgiving. It wasn't about the effort itself. It was about what it meant. All those years I had been cooking, cleaning, and organizing while he showed up with nothing but an appetite. He hadn't been incapable, he just hadn't cared enough. The moment he had an audience that wasn't family, he suddenly found the ability to do everything he had once dismissed as too much work. So I did something petty. I RSVP'd yes to his Friendsgiving and showed up empty-handed. It was glorious. His apartment looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The table was perfectly set, there were little candles flickering in decorative holders, and the food actually smelled incredible. He had gone all out, and I could tell he was proud of it. He had transformed from the guy who once brought a six-pack of beer to Thanksgiving into someone who cared about presentation, timing, and atmosphere. The second I walked in, he looked at me expectantly, scanning for the dish I was supposed to bring. He had assigned me mac and cheese, a dish I had made for years at our family dinners. A dish he had specifically requested in the past. A dish that, up until this very moment, I knew he fully expected me to deliver. He frowned. "Where's the mac and cheese?" I smiled, all innocence. "Oh, I forgot. You got it, right?" The look on his face was priceless. It was like watching every single time he had done this to me hit him all at once. The flicker of realization, the disbelief, the slow, dawning frustration. He opened his mouth, then shut it again, like he was struggling to process what had just happened. My mom, who had been standing just behind him, let out a tiny gasp. She wasn't scandalized, if anything, she was impressed. She leaned in slightly and whispered, "That was cold." But I caught the smirk she tried to hide. Dinner went on as planned, but the tone had shifted. He scrambled to make something last minute, throwing together a box of Kraft mac and cheese that he clearly had stashed away for emergencies. The energy was different now, though. Every time he passed me a dish, I could feel the weight of what had just happened hanging between us. He knew. He got it. For once, he had to deal with what it felt like when someone doesn't put in the effort. Lesson learned, effort should go both ways. Update 4. After that dinner, I thought my brother would just get mad and find a way to brush it off, like he always did. But this time, something had changed. He didn't make a scene, didn't try to justify himself, and didn't twist the situation to his advantage. He simply accepted the fact that, for the first time in his life, someone had made him feel what I had been feeling for years. The following week, I got a message from him. It was short, "Okay, I was an asshole. Next time, I'll actually cook something." I didn't know what surprised me more, his admission or the fact that he voluntarily offered to take on some of the work. And he actually followed through. At the next family dinner, he showed up with roasted potatoes. Not just plain baked ones tossed on a tray, but properly seasoned, with cheese and bacon. My mom nearly dropped her fork when she saw it. Everyone pretended like nothing out of the ordinary was happening, but there was something different in the air. That didn't mean he suddenly transformed into the perfect host or became a culinary genius. No, sometimes he still forgot things, sometimes he brought store-bought food instead of making something himself. But he was trying. He was no longer the guy who just showed up, ate, and left, leaving the mess behind. And most importantly, no one in the family expected me to do everything anymore. At some point, I realized that I hadn't just changed a family tradition, I had changed the dynamic within my family. I was no longer the one carrying all the responsibilities, the one who had to organize everything while everyone else just enjoyed the results. Everyone who came to these dinners now understood that it was a shared effort. And even though no one ever directly apologized, even though no one openly admitted they had been wrong all those years, I knew they understood. It was a small victory, but without a doubt, the sweetest one of all.